This is the very, very first podcast, right? This is like or video cast or whatever.
Bit of both, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did we get here, Loretta? How on earth did we get here?
Gosh, it's a long story. It's not a long story in some ways. It can be as long or short as we want, just like our project.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh God, that sounds really glib.
It's been touch and go for a while, but I don't know. Where did we start anyway?
Yeah, where did it start? Because
like
it now feels like a bit of a blur. It's going at a bit of a speed.
It feels like we cast around for a long time as to what the project should be. And everyone wanted to do robots. And I was like, oh my God, boys want to do robots. Do you remember that?
I did. I barely. Where did it? Because
and then
I can't remember what was happening before it was a robot.
Yeah, exactly. It was about bats, but that's ancient history.
Oh yes. No, the bats.
Isn't
no,
that
I remember
still
now.
on the? Wait a second.
Yeah.
This is still on the Miro board. So I'm going to bring up the Miro board.
It was about bats for a long time.
The giant flying bats that you fly on, you ride.
Yeah.
So I remember. Okay.
And then like the minute we started talking about this, like very Pixar inspired short story, you asked me to write a short story about robots because everyone wanted to do robots. For some reason, everyone was really.
That was the thing we had in common, and particularly because I think we were all saying they're relatively easy to build and work with. Like it's not like animating an animal with fur or something.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That was our thinking. And I remember Fred suggested we do robot bats, and I was like, "Flip the table, robot bats." I remember being like, "I can't deal with this. I can't deal with Fred's ideas." And then we came with this idea about the robot and how it's really lonely, and to base it in something domestic and relatable, and kind of have an emotional core, and that's where it really took off.
Yeah, you're right. I guess the thing I forgot about was that this is still called Project Reillusion because we saw. Do you remember a couple of us saw that there was money to be had if you used Reillusion for a project. Potentially you could kind of get some funding to help the project. So it was that seems like a good excuse. We could split a little bit of money between us. Who wants to have the fun? And then suddenly, as you're saying, suddenly that sort of started to snowball. But yeah, I think these were some of the original things that we said, hey, let's all throw some references on Miro and share them. There were a lot of droids, a lot of sci-fi.
For some reason,
quite moody.
Everyone was really into sci-fi. Everyone wanted to do sci-fi, and
that was the common thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think the really interesting thing is that like technology and AI were themes in the story. And then we ended up using, obviously we're using technology, but AI actually becomes part of the design process. Yeah. So I feel like it's kind of really weird. It's very meta.
Yes, exactly.
In some way.
Exactly. That's a good point. I'm going to write it down.
So one of the things we'd come up with early on was this idea of we'd hit across solarpunk. I wasn't aware of solarpunk. You told us about solarpunk, Loretta, I think.
Yes.
But then when we started to look into it, there was this mixture of. We started to come across things like some of the architecture from Star Wars that had a kind of Italian or European Renaissance style to it. We started discussing that we didn't want something dystopian. We didn't want to go, black and moody, but something, not that it was particularly steered towards Afrofuturism or anything, but just that post-dystopian, like people who have what is life like when we don't assume AI is going to come and get us in some way.
A refreshing take. Yeah,
a refreshing take. And then do you remember this? It turned out to be like some sort of yogurt advert. Do you remember there was this animation that turned out to be a yogurt advert or something that people kept referring to as it was a bit of a touchstone. This is from the same animation, so it's a bit of a touchstone. It's this very Studio Ghibli inspired thing. But it turns out it's for Chobia yogurt or something.
Yeah, I think that we wanted something that had weight, that wasn't saccharine.
And that was saccharine, wasn't it? That was like a group of people playing in a field or something and
And
living perfectly.
we kind of wanted a balance between something that was believable because it's not too saccharine,
Yeah, exactly.
but also not so grim as to be emo, because
Yeah.
emo is very embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you want a kind of sci-fi that everyone can identify with, like everyone would want to be a part of. Yeah.
So I think it was nice that we tried to ground the ideas a little bit. After that, we tried to ground the ideas in terms of I was putting up things like product designs that were future facing. That led us to robotics.
We talked a lot about robotics and machine consciousness and consciousness generally. We talked about how we want to explore that relationship between humans and robots, and through that, humans in the future.
Yes.
I think that's what we settled on, and we were all interested in this relationship.
Yeah. And I can feel it even now. I can feel it pulling me when I sort of, in my own mind, when I go through an exercise of thinking about where the story goes. It's very, very easy to sort of to slip into that negative and sort of want to pit an AI against someone. Oh, given that opportunity, it would turn bad, or it would
battle royale.
But, yeah, but it would. That's why I think this is more interesting, because this is harder won. Like, how do you get to something that doesn't feel like a saccharine yogurt advert, but that is interesting and explores what we're talking about with our future in terms of artificial intelligence. We should mention as well, because he's not here for this, but working with the wonderful Rory, who's been doing all this great sound design research and looking at different techniques and feeding us some interesting stuff to help inspire it.
Actually, he's really lovely.
And it was tough. I think the beginning was tough, right? Because we wrote, how many are here? There's like 26.
We wrote a lot of different things. We had
there's 20 odd sort of short stories that range from like one sentence to a paragraph or two, that we were just trying to find something that we could all.
I thought it was like we were trying to speed date with each other and trying to figure out what we're all about, like try and get
what are you into?
What you got,
I think we were, and I think it was a good, nice way to get stuff out. And it was a nice way to just kind of loosely, I guess, do it from the ground up. We knew where we wanted to go. Everyone felt strong about the sort of solar punk direction. But we then came back, didn't we, and said, actually, something's not right about it. It's like we said, it's too saccharine. But I think I have a feeling that it was you writing something that was we were trying to. That's the thing, is it was very chicken and egg back then as well. So how do you write the story before you can see something, and how do you see something before you've got story? How did we break that? From your perspective, because I think you've both been driving so much of this from Loretta from a literary point of view, and Fred from a visual point of view. What changed? What changed? How did we get past that chicken and egg problem?
I think for me, it's always getting over that fear that you're going to do a lot of work and then it's going to be thrown out. I think that it's about like loss aversion and getting rid of that fear of loss. As an artist, because obviously every time you write something and you spend lots of time crafting it, you feel very attached to it. However, it's something that you can't have when you're working in a group, which I think is great practice for when we have jobs, because that's just being an artist in a studio, right? And I think
it's go on.
I was going to say, for me, the second point at which I was like, bam, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I love this project. I'm going to go with it to the ends of the earth, is when Fred came up with these images from the AI, which again, like we said, it's very meta, because we're writing a story about artificial intelligence and how forward-facing it is and our relationship with it. But we're at the same time artistically exploring what our relationship with this algorithm is. And
that's very true. I'm
Yeah.
gonna let me let's
it's a weird relationship, isn't it? It's like but I kind of think it's like
let me go to this.
getting extra RAM for your brain, for your imagination. It's
Yes.
like you get
Yes.
like a graphics card in there, so you do this thing, and then it's almost like
It's
it's still you
exactly.
doing it,
Yeah.
but it's like, you know, you just get a bit of an extra helping hand. I think
So let's try. I mean, let's. I've got this on screen, and I think this is an interesting point because some people might not be familiar with it. So we can talk about it for the audio
Yes. I think
side,
that
but
would.
we've got this on screen, which if people are watching on YouTube, this will be kind of more interesting. So, Fred, can you talk a little bit about MidJourney, why you even started using it, and what it can actually do? Let's sort of talk about some of the things we can see on screen here, for instance.
I was one of the people that were really late coming to Midjourney. I heard about it a couple months before I started using it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just one of those things that was just, oh yeah, I'll get around to, I'll get around to it. And if anybody else listening is thinking that you're making a mistake, you need to jump into it immediately, because it's literally it's infinite in its capabilities. Like, it's getting better every day, but it's just so varied. In terms of just like realism is considered an art style. You type in realism, you'll get a photograph of something, and just to have that power, just to say like, oh, okay, I need to see what this would look like, and you can do it. Honestly, I think it's going to be one of those things that we're not going to know what we did without this thing. Like, we're going to get so used
No.
to it that we're going to be like, how did we manage without it?
So I think
Artists used to have to do this, you know.
I tried it first and mucked around with it, I think, and then I think I was trying it while we would sort of, and it wasn't. We weren't thinking of it as something to use for this at the time, because I think or were we? Because because I remember trying to get something out of it and I just wasn't able to do it. And I think I lost interest, and I thought, well, I'm not going to spend the money every month doing it. And then you were much more determined than I was, Fred, and you kind of came back to it a few times, and started to produce this really interesting artwork. And I think it's worth saying that for anyone who doesn't know, you just go into Discord, and then you go into
If you don't
Discord.
already have Discord, sign up.
Yeah,
And then
you sign into
sign up for
Discord,
Midjourney.
which is just a sort of chat thing, and you're chatting with a bot, and that bot is taking your request, your prompt, your imagine prompt, and there's on the screen now. There's some prompts here. So there's to get a very sort of naturalistic looking bunny rabbit stood up
That
on
is
its
so
back
cute.
legs,
That
with
is the cutest little thing.
backlit and dressed like an astronaut, but without the helmet on. And it's a beautiful image that if someone showed me that and said this took a CG artist, days to produce, I would have said, okay, then yeah, probably. And all someone did to create that image was type the words "tiny, cute, and adorable astronaut bunny, Jean-Baptiste Monge, anthropomorphic, dramatic lighting." And if you type that in, you will end up with, and possibly they've then clicked on a variation, or they've changed it, because you get that option to do variations in Midjourney.
Half the work is working out what prompts work, and then it's just choosing the variation. Sometimes you have to go down the river a little bit, and then you'll get something like, that's good.
So it's worth saying that we can. I mean, again, on screen, I'll throw some of these up on screen, but we'll talk about them as well. But you've now, Fred, been able to produce with Midjourney some pretty amazing landscapes, and some pretty amazing images that have really inspired us to help us hone in on something. Loretta, do you want to talk about what it is that we feel we've honed in on now that when we see this red house, for instance? We've got this lovely sort of house on a shelf, this frontier house. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. From a story perspective, we've really honed in on the sense of alienation and isolation that is the zeitgeist of this particular moment in time. We've just come out of isolation, and this picture really spoke to us of that loneliness. And it goes to the core of our story about a lonely droid who is anticipating rejoining with this family that has bought the house. And I think that alienation is a big theme in sci-fi, and I just feel like visually exploring it in these color tones, in these shapes, it just feels like it's coming together in a really beautiful way.
It does. Suddenly, I think this was the image that you, Fred, do you have any recollection of what you typed into Midjourney to get this out?
I said something along the lines of, I can actually check for you. I can give you the actual answer for that question. I just need to go to.
While Fred is checking, I just wanted to say something about how I was reading a book about transhumanism and what it means to have enhancements on the human body or as a human being. And the concept of being better because of your tools goes back a very long way, in the sense that when the first human made the first axe, the axe shaped human history as well as humans shaping axes. So it's always been this back and forth. And you see that mirrored back and forth between Fred typing things into MidJourney and MidJourney spitting things back out. And then there's a lot of articles out there about, the nadir of creativity because we've got all the stuff. It isn't. It's not any more than a human writing something on a notebook, because a notebook is the first iPod. A notebook is the very first prosthetic. So I think it's the, like Fred said, it's the burgeoning, the sunrise of a new kind of creativity rather than
and I think to that point, what interests me most is that, Fred, I remember when you produced this image, and we've got recordings of those meetings where I think the rest, I think you saw this separately to maybe some others, or maybe it was a droid you saw separately. There's a recording I've looked at again where there's like a collective gasp of like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
And you can feel the inspiration, but this image is done without ego, without, it's not to say artists necessarily have one, but there's no one's offended and nobody's sort of, there's no struggle in there to just say, well, that didn't work, let's type something else and we'll see what we get. And then the fact that you produced this, Fred, suddenly, I mean, there's lots of things about the image of this sort of red frontier house on another planet. It's sort of riding up on it's like there's a house sat on a shelf. It has something very, to me, it looks like the cover of a sci-fi book from the sort of 60s or 70s.
Actually, some 1920s comics still have that kind of look and colors. Yeah, so
very vibrant, really kind of interesting. A little bit No Man's Sky. People are familiar with that in terms of the sort of art direction. But it brought that into it. Suddenly, we were able to, instead of trying to articulate it with words, we were suddenly able to point at something, and we're suddenly able to say, "Hey, what are those pipes that MidJourney is stuck at the back? Maybe they do this. Maybe they transport liquid, or." Yeah. And we've taken that image apart and then discussed MidJourney doesn't understand what it's made in a way. There's no concept artist there to tell you, oh no, I drew this because I was thinking about that. So we've had to then impose back on this prosthetic, this creative prosthetic, what we think it's doing. And in that's extending our creativity through a kind of invention of.
It's like having a dream. It's like you get imagery that doesn't make any sense, but your mind makes it make sense. And I personally, I see this as MidJourney is almost like a higher art form, and I'm not afraid of saying that because it takes the ego out of it, and the way it's iterative. It's like life. It's like the way things evolve. It's like art is now evolving on its own. And when I'm putting in the words, I'm not putting in my own meaning of the words. The computer, the AI will analyze, how images are tagged. What does this word mean? But it's not based on what I mean. It's what collectively as humans we've all agreed on. That's the meaning of this word, and that's how it's come through. So it's almost like we're collaborating with each other. But I'm collaborating with artists that have been dead for centuries, because I can just type in, Van Gogh, and it will take the style from that, because it's all just mathematics. I mean, no one's going to argue that.
And there's a picture on screen now of the droid that came out of, I mean, you were doing hundreds of these things, and then this suddenly appeared and everybody, we all had the same reaction to this one. Out of the hundreds that we saw, we all had the same reaction to, we have to do something with this. What was it? I think you made some interesting comments at the time, Loretta. What was it about this particularly? We talked about it being a sort of nurturing, but then this sort of, we went from transhumanism to almost sort of
I think what
roboticism or something.
I think what it is about this image is the melding of the artificial and the natural. I think that the glass dome with the plants inside speaks to a very sort of Christian idea, philosophy of dualism, how there's a body and a spirit, how there's something alive inside any kind of frame, and in exploring the human relationship with robots, we are going to have to explore that anthropocentrism and that kind of projecting ourselves onto robots in order to have this relationship with them, which is what the story is going to be about. Our relationship with this droid and what it means to be having droids in our life, in our family.
And one thing you mentioned recently that I absolutely loved was in our Slack group was that actually, because when we had a meeting, we'll talk about this in a minute, but we had a meeting with the architects earlier this week, and one thing that came up was that this image, actually the house isn't that optimistic architecturally because it's not combining enough with the environment.
The platform is the real thing that is the key of that image, I think. Everything else can be changed, but the thing that really stands out is just the way that platform is.
And Loretta, you spoke about the tension, the obvious tension there between, you can be optimistic and go to other planets, but we talked about there's this sort of reluctance to sort of get stuck in immediately. And there's a little bit of that going on with the same robot as well. There's a beginning there of how do we work together? How do we fit together? This is probably a good point to talk about so while we're kind of recapping, we could now probably talk about the architect meeting that we had earlier this week, and you were there for half of it, Loretta, or most of it, I think. Did you I'll intro this a little bit and then we can discuss it. But essentially we showed them a deck, which is some of the stuff that's on screen right now. And we got to the point where we were looking at architectural stuff, and Fred, you were getting these amazing images out of MidJourney. And then we've got these guys who are like architects who have been formally trained. They're Italian, so in their DNA is quality, well designed. Yes. Their DNA is shaped like a Ferrari.
Expensive.
Exactly. And the nice thing is because we all work in the same tool or the same kind of couple of tools, that suddenly brings together this new opportunity for production design, whereby you can actually use an architect who has an understanding of materials. And for me, that so many great things came out of that conversation, and very kind of them to produce these ideas, these references, and tell us about these architectural competitions and projects where people are trying to imagine what life might look like on Mars and what materials might be there. And Loretta, what came out of that session on Monday for you?
It was just a sense that we're all using the same prosthetic, going back to the idea of transhumanism. I felt like having this 3D engine joined together, architects, artists, game designers, filmmakers, it just felt like we were all on the same page, and we were all using the same tools, but from completely disparate disciplines, and so many,
all the spokes on a wheel. Exactly. We're all doing something different, but we're all working together.
Exactly. So and I just feel really privileged to be able to work with so many different people, and the stuff that's coming out is really interesting as well. Their perspective on architecture and how it should or shouldn't, as it were, talk to the environment around it. And we came to the conclusion that we do want this kind of sense of alienation rather than a sense of being a part of. So being a part rather than being a part of, because the story is about two sides of humans coming together, like the stuff we create with us, the robots and the family. It has to start with an alienation feeling and
Yeah.
then go towards a sense of being together.
Yeah. And yeah, that's what we said. And I think the other Fred, this came out of. Do you want to talk about this image, where this came from?
Yeah, I'm actually low key in love with these ones. I
Mm.
really like. It's just something I like seeing when I'm watching movies, when I'm reading books. I like to feel like I want to be there a lot of the time. And when I see things like this, it's like I want to live in this thing. It's like it's like a spaceship, an RV, a luxury hotel. It's everything all in one, and it floats around, and it's yellow. But no, it's very ambiguous. It's very modular. It looks like you could have a whole fleet of these, and they'd all be different.
And I think this kind of image where the architecture is a part of its surroundings, the humans are a part of the robots they create.
Yeah.
That could be the end point for
Yeah.
our film, the end point for the story, where we find that harmony. And I think that harmony is a lot of what solar punk is about, finding that harmony between technology and humans.
And there's a tension when you're trying to find it. There's plenty there in terms of drama without having to fight an AI and have the Terminator chase you and or the thing try and escape, or the sort of Pinocchio gone bad, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
All of that. I don't feel like we need to go there.
That's like a cancer. It's a natural thing, but it's like a bad natural thing.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like, I think this with harmony in this respect, it's a little bit like the path of least resistance. If you look at like the prehistoric world where it's mostly carnivores eating each other, and we've kind of tapered out into this system that's kind of like we got species that only exist because they're helping other species. I was looking into, what a keystone species is?
Yes.
No, I don't. Tell me.
Well, Loretta does. A keystone species is a species that is essentially responsible for its environment. It has such an impact on its environment that if you were to remove it, countless other species would just die out. Beavers that you get in Canada are a keystone species. They build environments. They keep fish populations in check. They stop flooding. They stop droughts. I'm not sure they're aware they're doing it, but without them, and I'd like to imagine that robots for us in the future we would be designing keystone species to support us and our environment. Their job would be to go around and do these things.
For humans to become the keystone species, or
no, I think we would just I think humans would take a back seat. I think we're animals. We're advanced animals, but we're still just animals, and all we really need to do is get up in the morning, eat, sleep, love, all that stuff. And we don't need the system of it that we live in. And I think that a lot of that system and that responsibility can be alleviated from us through technology and this machine. But it has to work in a way that doesn't fight nature. It's the same system.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? When we talked about that, the red house on the shelf, the image, it was challenged by one of the architects as being not optimistic enough. We touched on this earlier. But it's, for me, I'd still stand by this idea from the creative direction that this is going in, to tie back to what Loretta was just saying, that this is the beginning stage. You are cautious when you begin something. You don't know what your final form is going to be. So that's led us, I think that's been a real milestone for me, is realizing that the image that you, what was it? It's James Cameron's. This was inspired by James Cameron's.
Yeah, this one was James Cameron's Deep Sea Challenger.
Yeah,
terraforming an alien world as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Right. So that prompt, if anyone's got MidJourney, go and do those kind of prompts. You might get something similar. But that led us, when the architects saw that they both said, yeah, this is much more integrated. And it is. There's sort of these, very futuristic looking buildings, but it's so hard to see where does the building end and the tree begin, and everything is sort of so entwined in a very natural looking way, compared to that image of the sort of red shelved house that's sitting away sort of cautiously from the ground that it's around, and it's not very well integrated yet. but you have to go through that stage to get to the other stage. You can't jump to that end piece. And I think in it, there's tension, and there's drama, and there's story of how we do that, and it's layered, like you were saying before, Loretta. We've got, that's happening with physically, literally, with the house and the thing. But when the droids are arriving, there's that same tension that exists between the droid and the family that are going to move into this frontier kind of home / scientific observatory, because they're having to integrate. They have to fit together. How does the droid fit into that family life? Is it just a servant? Does it become like a dog, like part of the family? We treat dogs like part of the family. Why wouldn't we treat an AI like part of the family in future? I find those questions really interesting.
It's what's funny is that this reminds me of the Wild West, like when the colonizers came over into the Midwest and trailblazing, and they did everything wrong. They farmed wrong, they traveled wrong. Everything that they knew about existing was just wrong in that environment, and they had to adapt. But if this is the kind of way it started, like this is the equivalent of like one of those wagons that's just crossing the desert, like the people coming to the frontier for the first time. But then over time, they actually end up developing more of a Native American nomadic, living off the land kind of thing, just more advanced in terms of like, the tools are more advanced, but essentially the culture is the same. It's
rather than industrializing, you look and say, those people are living in a very balanced way with their environment. Why don't we take a bit of the best of what we do and the best of what they do, and why don't we try and move forward in a different way? Rather than, this is not about brutal colonization of other planets. This is about a more considered exploration, and in that way avoids the sort of the alien encounter.
Is probably logical. This is going to be logical because we already know how easy it is to fuck up one planet, and we know how few planets are out there that we can live on. So we're not going to make the same mistake twice. So I think we're going to make that a real priority.
It's taken us a really long time to find one. So just treat it with care. It's worth, I think, jumping on to the some of the droids. We've mentioned these a few times. So we mentioned this one sort of opened up, the one with it's got a glass domed head, and it's sort of nurturing these plants. The plants are starting to live inside it. And then you started to explore, Fred, these different places within the building where we're saying maybe, the droids are the ones that are outside gathering some of the environment, bringing it inside, testing it, exploring it. What could be used for food? What could be used as part of the environment? What's there just for because it looks nice, or it makes the room smell nice, but it's not poisonous to people. That kind of, they're the canary in the coal mines. They're the botany bots. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the meeting we had yesterday? We can fill Loretta in on this now.
Okay,
we spoke to a tech artist yesterday.
Murphy. Do you know Murphy? Okay, Murphy. Cool. Murphy can use Houdini to make procedural things. So we were talking about initially, actually, I thought we were going to be talking about doing the house, but the robot actually was much more appropriate for now. He's got a system that's it's like a flow chart in Houdini where you give it some basic elements like some head, some legs, or whatever, and using some parameters that we predefine, he can randomly generate different robots that have similar appearances, but obviously have different functions. And we had a long conversation about that yesterday. The use case for it, when we got it sorted, is that we can then just use this to flesh out loads of different robot designs and then choose the best ones for the best thing, like a casting thing. Which is, when you think about it, almost a much more efficient way than getting a concept artist to just do 5 or 6 or 20 or whatever. We can literally just go through as many as you want. But then the other thing that we could do from that is NFTs. We could do generative procedural artwork that's directly linked to the film.
Let's address the collective sigh that might have happened to the 2 people, one person that ends up listening to this, who knows. But I know from having a podcast myself, mintedpodcast.com if you're interested, which was exploring, it was my way of exploring what on earth is Web3 about. And I wanted to do that by finding out about the people behind some projects, like how does this stuff work? and that's ongoing. I'm still doing that, and it's been very interesting. But I've learned from that the second you mention NFTs, you get a bunch of people who say scams, trouble, problems, and other people who just think it's a sort of get rich quick. People will just buy any old crap. Why are we, given that my entrance into that has been, I spoke to a lot of really interesting people. I spoke to the guy behind CryptoKitties, people who've worked on some really, really interesting and massive projects in Web3. Why might we go? Why are we interested in going down? I think that opens up this conversation about spin-offs. Why does that seem interesting to us?
Well, I mean, it's new, isn't it? It's new,
No.
and to be honest with you, I don't have a VR headset, and I don't have all the latest kit, but I have a feeling that I'm on the verge of we're on the verge of within the next 5 years, how we use the internet is just not going to be the same. It's like looking at a black and white TV, and I think that it's just getting yourself into that. But what I'm interested with the NFT situation is that you've got loads of. There's a lot of crap out there, and I'm like, there
is a lot of crap out there.
Shit, and you're looking, you think, okay, and you can imagine that there's this tired artist that's sweating and just I need the money, and he's just doing these terrible drawings and stuff. But then you get projects which are web app based, and they have some kind of utility them it's a game in itself, like CryptoKitties, But I feel like people can bring that a step further. I feel like there's different tiers of what NFTs are, and I feel like we want to go for something that's a bit more experimental and just see what can be done with it.
You and I have talked about it definitely, but Loretta, where are you with it, with Web3 and NFTs? What's your feeling? Where are you with it all?
I don't have a hot take, unfortunately. I think that it's one of those things that I want to reserve judgment on. I think it's too early to tell.
That's great, because that means that while some of us have sort of that means we're not all. This is what I love about this team, is that there's diversity in thinking already, because it's those of us who might be kind of overexcited and want to sort of jump in and do something. We've got a voice of caution and reason within the team is going to be I don't know. And I think in needing to then discuss that, I think if we were just three people who were completely sold on it, we could easily do something weird or not. I wasn't going to say dangerous, but risky is what I mean. Kind of financially or something. But it's worth, I think, talking just briefly about that was one of the things that the direction I'm going in is to hopefully become a creative director at some point, which I'm trying to do with this. And I think that term for me doesn't limit itself to one medium or one format. And I think it's nowadays, and with you didn't say the magic word metaverse a minute ago, Fred, but that's where you were sort of circling. That was the drain you were circling.
No, that's a minefield. I'm not going to say that.
I definitely recommend to anybody to read Matthew Ball's book on the metaverse, because he knows what he's talking about. It's very grounding as a book. I've almost finished it, but it's excellent, really, really excellent. So I think we should all definitely read it, and I think it just levels up the conversation. He's very, very much a sort of pragmatist and realist. The point I'm sort of circling at the moment is just that from a creative director point of view, for many years, this is true of me anyway, but I wanted to blur the lines or just not see any between films and games. And I talked to Haz from Hazimation, and I showed you, Fred, I think that you remember I was talking to you and Mario about their project where because they came on the Summer of Unreal course and gave a little talk, which was fascinating because they're using Unreal to produce a game and an animation at the same time. So as they're doing the set design for one, it's feeding into the other and the game, and there's a very hand in glove way of doing it. And I think that opens up so many options. And like you said, we're talking to a tech artist who's producing something procedural in Houdini that we can do in a very evolutionary sort of way and say, right, you know, if these are the first droids, what would the second generation of droids look like based on these pieces? What would the third generation of droids be like if you
And
merge
we
some
were
of these
talking
together?
about hereditary genes,
Exactly.
like within it, so that you could breed robots if you like the this and this, you know, you could do that.
You could
But
intermix them, and I mean,
it's
yeah,
worth mentioning as well that he did say, aside from doing procedural things like the robots or the architecture, you can do procedural levels and logic.
yeah, that was
So
interesting. Yeah.
we could have a greenhouse situation where the robots are going around doing their plants and stuff, and then we just throw in a few wild variables in there. And you know, we could use that as a B-roll for some background scenery, or we could actually have like a game. You know, we could build something into
I
it,
mean,
you know, eventually.
the potential is, because all of the stuff is there. And I know somebody who, a friend of mine who I used to work with at MPC, who's made this amazing product called Shift, which is like a node-based tool that sits outside of Unreal and all these other tools. I know that people are using that. I can't name drop this, I don't think, but I know that people are using that to do things like machine learning and evolutionary, that kind of analysis using 3D. So they would make, let's say you might be doing it for a, like whether it's a Roomba or a driverless car. Instead of building the car and making it go around the street, you just put everything into a physically correct situation, and then you run a simulation and you see what that simulation does, and then you run another one. But you need to procedurally keep adapting that situation and then feeding the information in. You need to throw a cyclist in front of the car, and then, you know, oh, okay, I didn't get it. Why didn't we get it right? Let's make an adjustment inside the game engine, and then let's run it again. So that, in theory, I think the idea of what you're saying, Fred, is the idea of setting up almost in a game, in a simulation within something like Unreal, setting up an environment and then having like robots like adapt, rebuild themselves, and they change themselves so that the garden can be looked after, almost, you know, an evolutionary sort of game.
Yeah.
What an amazing way
to
actually design robots.
It almost sounds like the proper way, doesn't it?
It always sounds like the proper way, yeah.
What,
but
you
that
mean,
would be
like how animals are designed by natural selection? Yes.
Yeah, we simulate
like
evolution.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But these tools are within, you know, they're there for us to do. It's just a matter of like having people to kind of do them. But that, to go back to the other thing, the spin-offs, what are the other spin-offs that we've talked about? Because that, suddenly I can feel that now going towards a game. Loretta and I, we've had game conversations. I know you two have had conversations about games and other things. What are you planning to work on next week that you've as both sort of caught your interest?
Well, Fred and I were talking about doing a comic together, like a little short story. I'll write the text, and he'll do some still images. I was thinking about the idea of a roguelike involving terraforming Venus, and how that would work, I don't know. It's still in the beginning stages. Or even just a little platformer, a side scroller to go on the website. Just something fun to introduce all of the characters, all the little robots. I mean, just different ways of interacting with the same narrative, right?
It's going to be nice just to have an open conversation, and just to see where that goes, because ultimately, like, what's really good about us spinning off and doing these little things is that we're world building without the pressure of it having to be A, B, C, D. We're going to get there collectively. You know, it's whether this is something that's set before our story, that's in the same universe, or something that's within the universe. Maybe this comic book is owned by the child that's going to be moving to the house, or you know, it could be anything. Loretta and I, we're going to be working as a team, but at the same time, there's going to be a third member of that team, which is MidJourney. And we're going to have to listen to MidJourney because we can't control it. We can control it within certain parameters, and obviously, because we're going to be doing something that's going to be graphically edited on Photoshop, I can mix things together, and we're going to have a little bit of control. But I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have a conversation, then play around with MidJourney, and then base the story off of what we see, and then do some more images based off what we just said. So it's going to be like a back and forth thing.
Yes.
We're going to find it
because
rather
you're
than
not going to
create
be
it.
able to say, oh, I want this camera angle and I want this person stood this far from the camera. That your MidJourney,
Yeah.
it imposes things on you, right? So I was going to mention this, whether you've seen this. Have you seen this? So what I'm showing at the moment is DALL-E a few days ago, and I missed it. Rishi told us about it on the Mastered Slack group. That there's a new process called outpainting in DALL-E, and you can imagine this might come to MidJourney. So basically, if I press this, you'll start to see an image gets made, and then there's the possibility of essentially extending the image.
Oh, holy shit.
Yeah. But then actually saying, no, I don't want that one. I want this one, this one, this one. So you actually have more control. So you find a starting point that works. And then you're able to say, okay, give me something there. And you can just keep flicking the image until it's filled out what you want. And then you end up with basically that.
Did you guys ever see the IT Crowd?
No.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
You know the bit where the big boss gets the call that the police are downstairs, so he jumps from the top floor of his office building like to kill himself. Like, I imagine this is like artists just finishing their like fine art degree, and they've just seen this and they're like jumping out the window.
I'm done. The thing is, I think the point is, it's not the end of concept artists. I find that particularly between someone who's got a good grasp of language, has an art background and understands it, because you need to understand what you're asking for. You need to articulate.
It's like the invention of the camera. It's like a camera made a new art form of photography. It didn't remove the previous forms of art. If anything, it sort of helped combine it. And everything we're doing is a composite art form. We're using sound, we're using visuals, we're using literature, we're using different types of visuals, logic.
Exactly. And someone's ability to take what's there. I mean, if you don't, we all recognize the girl with the pearl earring right in the middle. So if you don't kind of have that, if you don't have an understanding of what it is, you wouldn't be able to ask for this in the first place. You wouldn't understand the style of lighting from that period of Dutch, as a Dutch artist.
You need to speak the language.
Exactly. And then you can start to take that further. And now we're getting, and it's interesting what we're saying is, tying back to what we said at the beginning, that back and forth, and what we keep saying is that back and forth is now just become 2 days ago, not just, saying I want a girl with a pearl earring in the style of Vermeer, in a room with lots of, this has gone way beyond one prompt. This is now a back and forth by saying, okay, let's put a cabinet. You can't quite say maybe let's put a cabinet here. I don't think it's individual prompts, or maybe it is, but I'd be interested to know exactly how this works. And I can imagine this, the people who are behind MidJourney are probably watching everything that's happening with DALL-E, and they're all, borrowing ideas from each other. So this again just opened up a whole new
enabling
workflow.
It's very good.
Very enabling. We've seen people on LinkedIn. There was someone actually this morning, and I mentioned you in the thing this morning, Fred, who's been figuring out how to do like a comic or a storyboard consistently.
That's what inspired me. I saw that and I thought, you know what, we can do that. And I love comics growing up. I'm not afraid to admit it. I used to read the Simpsons comics when I was a kid, because they just sold them at the newsagents, and I just loved it. I like it was like looking at a storyboard for an episode, but it was in full color. And I just like the idea of like breaking things down and just the composition and just changing things around. But I was quite inspired by a film that came out a few years ago that I just mentioned to you, Paul, Enter the Spideyverse or Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah, Enter the Spideyverse, amazing,
the
so
Miles
good.
Morales one.
Yeah,
and that art style, I love it, because it's like a
It's
collage
incredible.
of different art styles, and it works together. And that's the thing with MidJourney, is that you're not going to be able to get exact results each time. But if we lean into that and say, well, it's about variety, then I think we can get away with it. So,
Loretta, you were going to jump in?
I think that because we're wrapping up, I wanted to end on a note about how artists might climb to the top of a tower and throw themselves off because
Yeah.
there's so many of these tools. You read in, for example, Vice about how a lot of 3D artists are getting suicidal
Oh, wow.
because of work pressures at
Mm.
Marvel Studios, big name film companies that are pushing artists to do things without. What I want to say is everyone should read the book Who Owns the Future by Jared Lanier, because it talks about how we should approach ownership and its relationship to artistic integrity or
Mm.
dignity.
Mm.
Human dignity is, I think, the sort of touchstone, and how we value this artistic work as we go into the future, how we pay for it, how we value the people and protect them from being exploited is going to be the
Mm.
question.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question, and it's an open question. We
Yes.
don't have the answer, but
No.
so okay, just to sum this up, we started from an interesting place. We started just throwing some images into MidJourney. A few of us met on a course, mastered course, and that's expanded to people who are not in mastered, who are starting to help us talk to us as well. Where we had this idea for a sort of 10-minute film that's come down to a sort of 30-second, 60-second thing that we want to just do to make something and kind of make this real. The use of AI, MidJourney, maybe now we'll start exploring DALL-E and this idea of outpainting. If I've asked a couple of people if they've got it to let me into DALL-E, because I've been on the waiting list for a while. And yeah, I think we're trying to discover a workflow that's real time, that works for us, that isn't just that sort of linear.
Ideas first.
Yeah, it's not just, hey, here's a script, let's make it. Now we're embedded in making it in that sort of linear VFX way, which has worked so well for many years. But to your point, Loretta, it puts people under enormous pressure to finish a show by a certain time. The producer really becomes like a midwife to the whole thing, just demanding everyone to just push and do more and just get shots out.
The most heartbreaking thing for me is when I see something like a show or a film that I love, and I love the cast, I love the write, I love everything about it, and then I go behind the scenes and find out that everybody had a really bad time making it, and it's heartbreaking, because it's like, well, what was the point, And when I think about like humans, we're quite impressed with how well humans are designed, that most people seem to think that something designed us because we're so well designed, but we didn't have an end goal in mind. We've just been adapting and making do and moving on, and with no end goal in mind. And I think that's kind of like what we're doing, is that we haven't set in stone what we're trying to achieve, but we're working towards it, building on what came before.
We'll figure the pipeline and the workflow. And I think it is worth saying, to balance this out as well, which is there's always bad press going to come up in pressured situation, but we know that just like VFX, there are other jobs in the world where I remember when I was a teacher, or thinking about people I know that work in the police or other services, and all sorts of jobs, and lawyers, where people expect you to work incredibly long hours at crunch time. It's not only that industry, and I think it's fair to say that. And I must also say that doing a couple of years at MPC, I met some of the most creative and brilliant people that I've ever worked with, who would just, whether it was their understanding of physics, their understanding of story, of how to put film together, who all came together in really, really difficult moments to make films that go on to make millions of dollars. But it's that cycle it's like a much faster version of a startup and a VC. VC puts 10 million into a business because they really want to get 100 million out. And it's the same with a movie. You put a certain amount in, you hope it's going to be $1 billion movie at the box office, but so many of them lose money. There are these razor sharp margins that add to the pressure. But from working a little bit in virtual production at MPC and seeing what's happened now, and what we've learned with Mastered, and seeing what's happening in the industry, reading Matthew Ball's book, working with you guys, this technology, this real-time technology, is changing how we work. It's that back and forth again that we talked about, that how we work with each other. Suddenly you can work in real time. Suddenly it's more collaborative. It's not a case of well, we can't see what this looks like with the lights because, you know, it's got to go to that lighting department and it needs to go through tech anim and FX before it goes to lighting, or whatever it is. Now we can, you know, you can work on these things more collaboratively and sort of iteratively build up a scene and a shot.
Technology is liberating us.
That's
That's what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's what's making this, and the fact that we're, like you say, I think there's a parallel with how we're doing it and what's in the story.